I'm Glenn Campbell. I call myself a demographic philosopher. I'm looking at life and trying to predict the future through the lens of demography, or the study of human populations. And today I want to talk about the future of education. Education is really critical for building the next generation. We don't just need to produce babies. We need to program those babies in our way of life and our morality, and this process is generally referred to as education. And one of the reasons you might not want to have babies is a lack of faith in the public education system and a concern about paying for education for your child after public education is over. And in the United States, at least, these costs are significant. Not only do you have to spend, $250,000 or so to raise the child, you're also expected to spend $250,000 to put them through college. Because in the United States, higher education is not free. Primary and secondary education is free up to about age 18, that's grade 12. But after that, students and their parents are expected to pay for higher education. So if you want to become a doctor, trained to be a doctor, you are expected to pay for your own training until you become a doctor. And right now, to pay for that training, most students take out student loans. And this is a big political issue right now because the student debt is not insignificant in the United States. And it's part of what's holding down the younger generation and keeping them from moving on with their lives. So if you're a young adult who's saddled with a huge amount of student debt, you're probably going to delay things like buying a house and having children. So a huge burden of student debt on the long run is actually going to decrease fertility. So people who are heavily in debt are less likely to have children because they know they can't afford them. Now, if you look at the younger end of the spectrum, the part of education that's currently free in the United States, you see problems there as well. Because public education is underfunded, it's mired in bureaucracy, and it's committed to a factory model of producing standardized citizens. Let me explain what I mean by that. Formal government-sponsored education takes place in classrooms. You go to a school where children are segregated by age, and one trained adult teaches a number of students according to a pre-established curriculum. So you go into the fourth grade and you learn certain math skills that are said to be appropriate for your age group, and you go through a sequence of steps to learn those skills. I call this industrial education. So this is where we've systematized education and we're putting children through a factory, essentially, to program them with certain skills. And this is far better than no education at all. There are many communities in Africa that could greatly benefit from any form of education. But the systematized education is not very efficient in that it kind of forces everybody to go at the same pace, and it holds down the students who could do better. And it has the net effect of actually killing a student's love for education because let's say you really enjoy math. Well, you're not allowed to jump ahead in math. You have to go at the same pace as everyone else. Formal education is better than nothing, but it's kind of a deadening process that lops off the heads of any daisies that happen to rise above the rest. It's far more efficient to have individualized education where every child goes at his or her own pace and doesn't have to wait for all the others, but that tends to be very expensive. You can hire a tutor to teach just one child, but only the very rich can afford that. So how do we redesign our educational system in some future society to work better so that it's cost effective and doesn't kill a child's love of learning? So first I want to address higher education, and later I'll address primary education. In America right now, the higher education issues are crystallized around student debt. Citizens of the United States owe about $1.5 trillion in student debt, which among other things is dragging down their ability to spend money on other things, such as having children. Right now we're in the middle of a presidential election cycle, and there are candidates on the left-wing side who promise to forgive all student debt. without getting specific about how they're going to pay for it. You can't just wave a magic wand and make all that debt disappear, because real people, real entities own that debt. There are banks that own that debt and other institutions that the money is actually owed to. So to do this legitimately, the government would have to reimburse those other entities. The government essentially would have to pay for it. And we have a government that right now is already deeply in debt. It's taking in only $3 trillion in taxes while spending $4 trillion. So $1.5 trillion would have to come out of the government somehow. It would have to be tacked on to the national debt. And then you've still got the problem of what you do about future students. If you've forgiven all the debt of past college students, what about college students who are now in college and will be in college in the future? Are you going to forgive all their debt as well? If that's true, then essentially the government is committing itself to fund higher education. And where is it going to get the money to do that? So this is a big debate on the Democratic side of the presidential election. And you have people who say all debt should be forgiven, or only the debt of the poorest people should be forgiven, or no debt at all should be forgiven. What no one is seriously debating is the value of higher education to begin with. Maybe higher education, as we've come to see it, is a dinosaur that is destined for extinction. Let's look at this historically. Education used to be a place that you went to. It was a place that knowledge was stored. There were people at universities who had information in their brains, and the only way you could get that information was to go and talk to those people. And there was also information in physical books, and those books were stored in libraries. If you wanted to gain that knowledge, you had to go to the library to read the book. And that's why universities exist, as places to house knowledge. However, that's not the state of knowledge today. Today, knowledge is distributed. It's in the cloud. You don't have to go to a special place to receive information. So why do these universities exist at all? If you're a college student, what does your life consist of? It consists of going to lectures where somebody talks at you, and maybe you write some papers on this knowledge and take some tests to see how well you've mastered the material. How much of that really requires a place? Can't you do that all online? I mean, sitting in a lecture hall is exactly the same as watching a YouTube video. I remember in my early days in college, all those introductory classes that I went to, they were held in big halls with 100 people. There was no real interaction with the professor. The professor just lectured. So why do I have to go to that hall? Why can't I just pull up a video? Why can't 1 million people pull up that video instead of the 100 that are in that lecture hall? It makes no sense to me. And when it comes time to take a test, why can't that test be done online? Why do you need to rack up $250,000 in fees for a place that isn't relevant anymore? Personally, I'm very skeptical of higher education because I don't think I got anything out of it. I attended a number of colleges, mostly as a way to move around the country, and I gained a lot from the experience, but I don't think I gained anything at all from my classes. I had my own education program, my own motivations for doing things, and college was just a convenient structure that allowed me the free time to pursue my muses. And I basically follow the same pattern today. I am self-educated. When there's something I realize that I need to know, I go online, I do a Google search. I may watch a video by a college professor talking about his area of expertise. And if you're a college professor who truly believes in the democratization of knowledge, then you will put your lectures online. So you can actually listen to a Yale University professor without being a student at Yale University. These days, when all the information you want is available on the internet, all you really need for education is the motivation to do it. The only thing formal education provides is a command structure that makes sure you hit all the key spots that are regarded as important and that your knowledge is ultimately tested in the end. There is some importance in having a mentor or a sensei, somebody watching over you to make sure that you master a complex skill. If you have a doctor who's operating on you, you want to know that he's gone through a rigorous process of testing and evaluation and feedback to make sure that he's learned all the skills that are necessary for the operation he's performing on you. But that's a relatively small part of higher education. Most of higher education is sitting in a lecture hall and receiving information. Then you do some exercises, mainly on paper, and eventually you get tested on your knowledge. And none of that requires a place. I suspect that 90% of medical school can be conducted online. When you graduate from medical school and start your practical training as an intern, yes, you need to be in a real hospital interacting with other doctors. But none of that preliminary stuff of learning the bones of the body and learning your chemistry, none of that requires an actual university. So once you get away from the idea that knowledge has to have a place, there's the potential to make education a whole lot cheaper. If one lecturer is lecturing 100,000 students instead of 20 students, well, there's a huge economy of scale in that. You don't need 10,000 history professors. You need only a handful of professors specializing in certain fields to give their lectures, which you should be able to pull up online. You shouldn't have to be spending $250,000 on education. You should be able to do it online for a small fraction of that. In fact, you should be able to do it so cheaply that the government can pay for it. The government can't pay for 10,000 history professors. It can pay for a dozen history professors who distribute their knowledge widely. Of course, there is some part of the higher education process that requires human interaction. For example, if you write a paper, if you write a report, there has to be a human reviewing that report. But this can be a human in their pajamas in their bedroom. You don't need the place anymore. Now, there is another function that college serves. It's a sort of a halfway house between your parents' house and the real world. Once you turn 18, it doesn't mean you're a full adult. You still have a lot to learn. And college provides this kind of transitional environment where you can live semi-independently away from your parents while you learn more about the world. So it's a kind of summer camp for rich kids. They live in a dorm and there are lots of parties and there's lots of entertainment and everyone has a lot of fun. But is this really necessary? I believe that the kind of halfway house concept is necessary, that people shouldn't have to just be kicked out into the real world at age 18. There should be a transitional environment. But a university is a very expensive transitional environment. There are other options. For example, a system of national service. If all young people had to join the military or engage in some other residential service when they turn 18, that would also provide a sort of transitional environment. If someone joins the military, there aren't many parties, but they do have a chance to move out of their parents' house and experience a structured environment that helps them along the road to adulthood. So in Israel, there is this compulsive national service required of both young men and young women. You go into the military, and this is an important part of becoming an Israeli citizen. You're indoctrinated into your national culture by going off and doing this service. Now, this doesn't have to be military service. There's all sorts of community service that is possible. The important thing is that it does have to be structured like the military or a university is, that you're giving young adults specific tasks and a structure in which to do them that's contributing in some way to the community. So I think this is every bit as valuable as going to university would be. In fact, it's a lot less frivolous. You're actually doing something important for your country if you join the national service, whereas university students rarely do anything important except for protesting things. So how I see the student debt crisis ending is that, well, there's going to be a big collapse of debt anyway, where all forms of debt collapse. If things get bad enough, people just stop paying their student loans and default on them, and that gets rid of the loan problem. And if all those student loans collapse, there's a good chance that a lot of universities will collapse as well because they're not going to get paid. And the only thing we'll have left of higher education is online learning. I don't necessarily mean that students are going to get online degrees that are the equivalent of 4-year degrees today. I think that future learning will be much more ad hoc, where you learn things as you need them. because you tend to take in knowledge much better if you know you're going to use it right away. I don't know how employers are going to evaluate this, but if you're acquiring knowledge for a purpose, then you just go online for that thing that you need right now. And if you're 18 years old and you've been raised in an environment where learning is appreciated and encouraged and part of the lifestyle of your family, then you know what you want and you know how to get it. When you know you need some knowledge, you can go out there and get it, specific to the tasks you're doing right now. So it's not like you go to school for 4 years and then quit. Learning should be a lifetime thing. And whenever you find that you need it, you go out and get it. This is not the case for the youngest children who must have human interaction to learn. No computer, no robot can teach a child basic language skills and basic moral skills. That has to be done on a one-to-one basis with another human being. And this brings us to early childhood education. While I believe that most formal education after age 18 should be online, I think that for younger children, none of it should be online. It should be all human interaction up to a certain age. I don't know what that cutoff age should be, but certainly preschool children up to age 6 or so should have little or no access to computers. So who's going to teach them? The traditional method is that we segregate kids by age and we teach them as a group by a certified teacher. So they go to kindergarten, they go to first grade, they go to second grade, all in the company of children the same age, in the theory that all children should master the same skills at the same age. This is actually quite expensive and kind of inefficient because it is ignoring a very important source of teaching resources, and that is older children teaching younger children. So instead of traditional classrooms segregated by age, I propose throwing a lot of kids of many different ages into one classroom, equivalent to the one-room schoolhouse of the American West. So you have one teacher, and you have maybe 20 students ranging from age 0 to age 18. This is part of the concept I've proposed elsewhere for a modular family. A very large family of up to 18 kids, all raised and educated together. And the efficiency of this system is that older children can care for and teach younger children. So look at the way things are done today. If you're teaching kids the alphabet, what we do is we take all kids of a certain age, we put them into one classroom, and one certified teacher with a master's degree teaches them their alphabets, A, B, C, D, E. It's either that or you have an individual parent teaching the child his or her alphabet. And in either case, it's a highly inefficient use of adult resources. Maybe this adult has a master's degree, and here they are wasting their resources teaching an extremely basic skill. Instead, the people who should be teaching the alphabet to children are other children who have just learned the alphabet. Now, I don't know at what age children should be learning the alphabet, but let's say it's 4 years old. Someone who just learned it might be 5 or 6, and they feel very proud of themselves because they know their alphabet. Well, they should be assigned to teach the alphabet to the younger child. And you accomplish a couple of things here. Not only does the younger child learn, but the older child also reinforces their knowledge by teaching it to someone else. So once you've learned something, the best way to cement that knowledge in place is to turn around and teach that thing to someone else. And older children are very proud to do this. I know something important and I can teach it to you, and I can be the boss. So let's take advantage of that. And that's essentially how the one-room schoolhouse would work. Older children teach younger children under the supervision of a real teacher. So there has to be a command and control system. There has to be somebody monitoring what is being taught and what is being learned and whether certain milestones are reached. So the actual dirty work of teaching specific skills doesn't have to fall to this teacher, who I call more of an educational manager than a teacher. So this person would say, okay, Sean, you teach Sarah this specific skill, and Sean does his best, and then once the skill has been learned, they present themselves to the teacher, and the teacher can evaluate how well that learning has taken place. So this is a hell of a lot easier on the adults than the adults trying to get down to the child's level and teach them basic skills. I think that for certain things, children can teach things as well as, if not better than, adults can. They understand better the thinking of their younger sibling. Now, there is still a curriculum, and there is still a series of exercises that students complete. And there are milestones that each student is expected to reach at certain ages. But no student is competing directly against any other student because in this modular family, no one is the same age that you are, which in an educational sense gives you the freedom to jump ahead of what is normally expected for your age group. For example, if you've covered all your bases in language and social studies and history, but you're drawn to mathematics and want to go far beyond your age level in mathematics, this system will let you do it. If you happen to jump ahead of your older siblings and they can no longer help you, then the job of the educational manager or teacher is to pair you with an adult member of the community who can mentor you. For example, if you have a 12-year-old who wants to explore Einstein's relativity theory and none of his or her siblings are capable of tutoring on that, then we go to adults and we find an adult who can at least understand what the child is talking about. In the modular family, the whole system, the whole community is oriented toward education. That's the purpose of childhood. It's not to have fun, although fun can be had. It's to achieve an acculturation process so that at the end of 18 years or so, you have a fully formed citizen who will help hold up the community. So I envision a defined school time. So maybe Monday through Friday in usual school hours, you are deliberately engaged in education. That is the sciences and the various history and social studies lessons that education normally pursues. But even when school time ends, you're still engaged in education. And the whole design of the family is intended to carry on the family's values. Dinner time isn't just dinner time. It is a time for procedures. It is a time for systems that train the child in social cooperation and other skills that are important to the community. So to paint this all in a broader picture, I am predicting, as discussed in other podcasts, a massive economic collapse. Governments will stop working. Economies will be devastated, and people will stop paying their debts. That means eventually that big universities will collapse. The whole notion of education being a place that you go to will collapse because it's senseless to maintain a physical infrastructure for something that can just as well be done online. At the same time, at the younger end of the spectrum, if you think the educational system today is falling apart, it's going to be even worse when the government becomes insolvent. And no one will want to send their children to public school. In that case, you have to come up with homeschooling options, which can be quite efficient if your family size is very large. If you have between 9 and 18 kids supported by a number of adults, then maybe you can afford to hire a full-time teacher, or at least a family member who can manage education. Now, this educational manager is working from a plan. In this very large family, there are also a large number of adults, and they get together to decide what sort of things the children should learn. The curriculum is a community decision, and once that decision has been made, it is passed on to the educational manager who actually implements it. I would say education is the single most important factor in raising the next generation. It's like you produce the computer, which is the child that comes out of the womb. But once that child arrives on this planet, you have to spend a long time programming that little computer in the particular software that your community believes in. I'm not going to try to tell you right now what that software should be, but the programming is important, and it should be the focus of the entire family and the entire child rearing process.